One of the main portions of his belief was that without freedom of press, you might as well not have government. And he said, given the opportunity or the option of a free press or a free government, only one of the two, he would take a free press. We can't survive without it. The problem is always that there's a responsibility to that free press to give information. You know, in America, and I don't know about Italy, I don't know about Europe as much, but in America, most of our news comes from television. Almost all of it. You know, most people get their news from TV. So there's the danger of if you don't start with a good, solid group of facts. You know, when we were young, there were 3 networks. They all started with the same facts. You got your facts, and then you went off and you had your own social or political views that you would filter those facts through. Now with 50 different news channels with their own sort of opinionated version of their own facts, depending on if you're a liberal or if you're a conservative or whatever, you watch the channel that best suits you. So you start with a different set of facts from the very beginning. So if you watch Fox News, for instance, from the very beginning in America, there was never any question that there were weapons of mass destruction, that there was yellow cake uranium in Niger, that Saddam Hussein was attached to Al-Qaeda, that he was attached to 911. There was no question about it. It was fact. If you watched CNN, they'd ask, maybe there aren't, maybe it's not true. And you would then, so the problem is there's no sort of, we're not starting with the same fact base now. And that's, you know, fractionalizing that can be dangerous at times, I think.
Which style did you choose for your movie? Is Good Night and Good Luck similar, for instance, to All the President's Men and other famous...
There were scenes I took from All the President's Men. What I loved the most about All the President's Men was the scenes when they were putting together the newspaper, when they were going through the newsroom. I remember that with my father, how they would go through news and go, okay, what do you have for the front page? Okay, no, that's not front page. And my dad used to do that for the broadcast. So we gave all the kids, all the guys in the newsroom, information, newspapers of the day, talking points, gave them stacks and stacks of research that they worked on. And then in the morning we'd come in with 2 cameras and I'd sit down as Fred Friendly and I'd go, okay, let's go. What do you got? And they go, well, we got, McCarthy did this, or Oppenheimer's trying to do, and they would bounce it all back and forth, and we'd write out and say, okay, that's not a news show. And then we edit it together, and it looks like a newsroom piece. It looks like a Pennebaker documentary. It looks really, I'm mostly proud of that, I think.
Why did you choose not to be the Mr. Mauro, but not to portray Mauro, but his producer?
Well, it's funny. When I first started writing it, I sort of wrote it with thinking I'd play Mauro. And then, you know, as I started to do more and more research about Murrow and learned more about him and watched him on camera, you always felt like Murrow had the weight of the world on his shoulders. Whenever you see him talking, he just felt like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. And it's something you can't act. It's just a personality trait. You know, either you have it or you don't. And I don't really have that quality. That's not what people think of when they think of me, you know. So I started looking around to find someone who looked like Edward R. Murrow and who always felt like they had a very, you know, they're sad. There's a sadness to them, which isn't what's normally associated with me. And David was the perfect guy. And I called him up and said, do you want to do it? And he said yes. And I didn't know whether he could do it or not until the day before we started shooting. Nerve-wracking. But I thought, I knew I have to play a part in it to get the money to get the film made. So I thought Fred Friendly was a part I could play. It's also no fun directing yourself. It's not fun, you know. It's more fun to be able to step back and go, you do that, you do that, you do that. It's no fun when you do a take and then have to go, so how'd I do? And it's not fun.
Good Night and Good Luck is a movie about news and television and journalism. Can I ask you your opinion about television, news television in Italy? Do you watch news in television? Do you admire any particular anchorman? Do you have what's your opinion?
Well, you know, I'm still trying to learn the language, so I'm having a little more and more difficult time learning the language. I haven't quite figured out how or what. Subtleties of like understanding. The last thing you learn when you learn a language is the subtleties, the little things, the turning of the screw, that's, you know, the opinionation, those are the things that you those are the last things you can gather. So I mostly just watch it now, trying to understand what's going on. It's very similar to the States, though, I find, because you have this world of, when fewer and fewer people own more and more stations, that what you do find is a lot of similarity in the news. A lot of the stuff I see looks like a lot of the news in the States. We've all made it look very, there's a lot of big chyrons up on top, and war in Iraq, and people missing, and it's all sort of flashed up a little bit. But that's happened everywhere, so I suppose that's what's necessary to get the news out there.
The movie is about a press who doesn't have to be afraid and to be free, obviously. What in this moment the TV journalism and the press has to say about the war to terrorism, in your opinion?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, in the United States, if you ask a tough question during a Bush administration press conference, which are rare, but if you ask a tough question, you're put in the back of the room and not allowed to ask another tough question. So the problem with that is that rather than holding their ground and saying, I'm going to keep asking that tough question, they back off. Well, that's not something we're used to in America. We're very good at being sort of, we had Watergate because of Woodward and Bernstein, not backing off. We're pretty good about staying at somebody on all sides. And by the way, it's brought down Clinton in many ways. So this isn't about Republican or Democrat. It's simply about how important those questions are to be asked. The New York Times, after the war, put an apology out in the paper and said we should have asked tougher questions. We made a mistake. Well, yes, they did, because they were the standard, and that's important. And if not the New York Times, then who? I did a show with Dan Rather, and I asked him why he wasn't asking the questions that he was talking to me about in the interview beforehand. And he said, because we can't. And I said, well, if you can't, then who can? So I find that there was a tremendous amount of being labeled unpatriotic, which is what I was labeled in my country. It was called a traitor on the front page of a magazine with my name on it, because I said, 6 months before a war broke out, that maybe there's some questions we need to ask. Not Saddam Hussein is a good guy, he isn't, but that's not the point. The point was there were many questions to be asked, and no one was asking them, and no one in the press was holding them to it and saying, answer these questions. And so that to me has been our great mistake, along with, we had a government who I think just panicked and did something dumb, but we didn't have a very solid press to attack them, and we usually do. But that's cyclical. It happens every 30 years. Everybody sort of chickens out for a minute, and then they come back.
Is there a link between Good Night and Good Luck and the other movie you
Syriana?
Syriana.
No, except that it'll probably get me in more trouble than Good Night and Good Luck.
So it will be a dangerous year.
Yeah, it'll be good, fun, dangerous year. I love this film. It's the reason for it is sort of, in its purest form, is trying to put a face on all of the elements, trying to bring into light, not being able to categorize somebody as an evildoer, but say, let's understand how these things occur. Let's understand our involvement from the very beginning. Let's understand how innocently all of our involvement is. Let's understand how their involvement started, how a kid straps a bomb on his back. Go back to how far back and what were the elements that made him lose so much hope. So it's controversial, to say the least. But for us, it's a good thing, because we want to open that discussion. Because I don't believe you can bomb ideologies out of people, or shoot ideologies out of people, or imprison ideologies out of people. I think you have to actually try and understand the ideology, and that's what the movie is. And it's certainly not an attack on the American government. It is an attack on people who categorize things. It talks about corruption. Well, corruption isn't Republican or Democrat. It happens everywhere. It's an attack on oil consumption and problems with oil companies, which do exist. It's an attack on labeling all of the people that commit these crimes as simply madmen, because there has to be something more than that. can't just be Mad Men. There has to be a reason behind